everyone. Thank you for joining us today for The Invisible Risk: Who Has Access to Your Practice Data? This topic comes up a lot in conversations, sometimes because something has almost happened or it already has happened. And a lot of people are thinking, what's really actually happening behind my screens? What's going on? So today isn't meant to be overly technical. It might seem a little bit scary with some of these stories that we're going to hear and some of these facts, but it is a very important subject and things that are happening today in real life. So I'm excited to be joined by Gary Solomon, CEO of Black Talon Security. He works hands-on with healthcare practices, navigating today's threat landscape, and Ali Aramshian, a CEO of HR for Health, who helps practices manage HR compliance and the leadership side when those issues do show up. Gary and Ali have actually presented together a couple times now at our Dental Leadership Summit this year, happening in Austin, Texas, in September or October, actually this year. But they presented and the response was eye-opening. So it's clear that we are seeing that practices are really getting into this and really wanting to understand what's going on. So today you can enter your questions into the chat box here, and we'll be sure to get to them by the end of the presentation. And if not, we'll follow up with you. And this session is recorded, so you'll get a copy of that as well. So with that, I'll leave it to you, Gary and Ali.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you. That was a great introduction. And Gary, we're going to jump into this in a second, but you're the only other person that I know that from the front of a room scares people more than I do. Even though it's not intentional, I don't try to make it intentional either, but it's just part of what we do. So anyways, welcome to our webinar. Excited to be doing this with you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's always a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gary, for those that don't know you, can you give a quick snapshot of kind of who you are and what your company does, and maybe a little bit of your background?
Yeah, I've been in the healthcare technology space for, wow, I'm getting old now, 34 years. We just wrapped up, another year, so I got to add a year to that. So yeah, I've been building practice management, EMR, EHR, imaging systems, cloud technology, and now security for all of those years. So I really started my security career in the year 2000 when I built one of the very first cloud-based healthcare systems. And cyber was a thing back then, but nothing compared to what we're seeing today. So, back then I kind of became obsessed with it, learning about how these criminals are breaking into networks and trying to defend against them. And look, the reality is back then I had millions of patient records in our cloud-based system. And I knew if someone got in, that would be a bad day for everyone.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So I spun up Black Talon Security in 2018 as a way to help healthcare organizations of all sizes better defend themselves against cyber threats. I think most people are aware of like phishing and spear phishing and most likely ransomware. So right now we support about 65,000 computers and devices in the healthcare space, everything from mom and pop, plastic surgeons, dental practices, all the way up to some of the largest DSO and medical groups in the country. So we see a very wide swath of technology and security systems in place. And really our role is to try and prevent intrusions into the network. So we're not an IT company. We bring, very, very high-end technology, certified security engineers to the table to help practices of all size better protect themselves from cyber events. So we work closely with their IT resources. We don't replace them.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about IT and whatnot because there is some confusion around that. But I think cybersecurity is one of those areas where there's real fear amongst really all small business owners, but especially our doctors, because not only does their practice have significant healthcare records, private information about the patient's social security numbers, credit cards, and all the other personally identifiable information, but then they have a lot of hands that are in their computer system. right? They have front office, they have back office, they have, sometimes interns, they have, the reps come in and sometimes they're logging in and looking at what's in there. Like there are so many people that have access to computer systems and networks and whatnot that it can be pretty scary. And it's one of those few things, Gary, I really believe this. It's one of those few things that it's really hard for a doctor, no matter how technical they are, to fully grasp how to manage this content, and how to manage cybersecurity in their office. It's a little bit like HR. Like you can be super legal minded and business minded, but still HR sounds just so complex and so detailed in so many different ways. Whereas, doctors, learn marketing, right? Right? They learn SEO, they learn all these other aspects of their offices. But I feel like cybersecurity is not one of those. And so as we kind of level set a little bit the conversation today, can you give us the current cybersecurity threat landscape? Like, what does it actually look like for healthcare practices and dental practices?
Yeah, look, I think this is kind of obvious, the answer I'm going to give here. It is becoming more complex and more aggressive every single day.
Sure.
If you look at how many ransomware groups, right? These are organized gangs that do ransomware as a service, that sell their very sophisticated hacking tools to almost any hacker that wants to pay the price. We're up against an adversary that's not, Dave sitting in his basement in Miami, Florida. You're up against multi-billion-dollar operations that have very, very significant structures in place, all the way up from the head of the gang, down to coders and everyone in between. And I think what's really happening now is for most healthcare entities, they're not grasping the sophisticated nature of these threat actors, and
Sure.
the IT resources are trying to defend the same network, or defend the network the same way they've done for years and have been quote unquote successful. It's just not working anymore. And I think, Ali, the biggest challenge is the theft of data, right? So we're actually have started to see a couple of cases, right? So let me backtrack for a sec. Besides defense, right, and preventing these intrusions, Black Talon gets hired by some of the most leading law firms and insurance carriers to come in and help recover their clients from an event. So we'll get a phone call and say, hey, we got a new victim. Can you take the case? So we have the capability of fully investigating these cases, doing digital forensics investigations, kind of like a detective looking at a crime scene and analyzing these events. And when you look at these events, one of the things we're starting to see is a morphing of their tactics and procedures. So one of the things that everyone thinks happens always is, well, they're just going to encrypt my data, which means they lock it up, with an encryption key, and then I have a backup and I can just restore my backup. Well,
Right.
that's kind of over, right? That does happen still, but that's not their primary methodology. Their primary methodology is to steal some or all of the data off the network, and that's their leverage. They'll go into the server, they'll go to the workstations, they'll find your backups. They will now absolutely, in many cases, access your cloud-based practice management and imaging systems, get logged into those and download all your patient records. And then they'll come back to the victim and be like, oh, you restored your backup? Okay, that's fine, but here's 10,000 patient records or a million patient records, whatever it might be.
Right.
And guess what? If you don't pay me $500,000 or $1 million, we will start calling your patients. We will publish these on the dark web. There'll be articles written about you, by leading security magazines, and you will then face class action lawsuits. Right? The threat actors clearly know how the game works because they will do everything conceivably possible for you to pay. So it's really, really changing from the intensity of the threats, from the days of like, oh, we encrypted your data, and if you pay us, pay us. If you don't pay us, restore your backup, and we don't care. It doesn't
Yeah.
work that way anymore.
Well,
In fact, in fact, what we're also seeing, Ali, is they may not encrypt the data anymore because they also realize sometimes when they encrypt the data, it triggers the antivirus software to block the attack. Now we've seen firsthand where there's no indication of the attack except for a phone call or an email from the threat actor saying, I got all your data, let's negotiate.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I remember this story that you said at our summit last year, and it absolutely kind of blew my mind. And I'll kind of paraphrase what you said, but it goes along the same lines of what you're describing. I think it was a plastic surgeon client of yours who had been hacked. They weren't a client before they were hacked. They became a client, I think, afterwards. But just to be clear,
Yeah,
but
yeah, just to be clear.
yeah, the plastic surgeon was hacked, and I guess they like ignored the messaging or the communication, or something happened. The threat actors ended up emailing the patients, I think you said, and basically said, if you don't pay us. So the doctor was one thing, right? The practice one thing, but then they went to the patients, I think you said, and they said, if you don't pay us, we're going to publish your, pictures of, your breast augmentation or whatever on the dark web, and make it more public, which is sort of a whole nother level, right? It's like a whole nother level of attack there. It's not even the practice anymore. Now, like you said, they have all this data and they're just going after potentially, the patients as well, which of course can be incredibly damaging.
Yeah, look, and that's what triggers the class action lawsuits. The second is
Right.
data, whether it's dental data, plastic surgery, dermatology, or oncology, right? The second is data gets published on the dark web or they start leaking
Right.
the data, the class action attorneys instantly swoop in, right? And then they take out the Facebook ads. If you're a patient of ABC Smiles of, Phoenix, Arizona, click here to join a class action lawsuit. You are part of a data breach. And all it
Yeah,
takes is
that's right.
one victim to start a class action. So,
Yeah.
going back to your initial question, we're in a very different world than we were a year and a half, 2 years ago in terms of the severity of these. And look, we can sit here and tell horror stories all day long, but I think the flip side is there's a lot of amazing technology and really smart people that can help businesses and practices, right, prevent these types of events from occurring.
Sure.
So
Yeah. We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. So let's talk. Let's talk a little bit about like the most common way that you see this happening. Okay.
yeah.
So if you had to rank these, and this is just like a super limited list, so please add to it. but is it email being compromised? Like, is someone clicking a link? Is that the most common thing? Is it like a vendor who's got some, I don't know, some open door into the software, that is getting, hit, like a third party, like some of these practice management companies that, do the data crunching for practices, or is it just like human error, where, something else they do, opens the doors up to these threat actors. What do you see? Like, what's the most common?
So, so the most common is still social engineering, which are the phishing and spear phishing attacks, right? Those are typically email based. One of the big ones we saw at the end of 2025, and we're still seeing it now, that impacted hundreds of practices across the country, was an email that originated from another practice in their geographical area. So let's just say you happen to be an oral surgeon, you get an email from a general dentist. It's like, oh, we're having a holiday party, on December 20th. Please click here to RSVP.
Oh,
So
wow.
Mary or John at the front desk clicks on it because they're like, oh, that's one of my best docs. Like, I'm not going to ignore this. They click on the link,
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
conceptually nothing happens. And what we saw was in about 10 minutes, the threat actor gained full access to that computer because it downloaded a
Oh,
screen sharing app. So to your point, a human mistake, right? So that
wow.
is still extremely common. And the problem with that type of event is the screen sharing apps that we're downloading are legitimate pieces of software like Screen Connect or Go to My PC. So the antivirus software applications are not going to stop that, right? That's just a problem. I would say second on the list is what's called vulnerability exploitation. So a vulnerability in the most simplistic terms is a defect in a piece of hardware or software, typically
Mhm.
related to the coding on that
Mhm.
device. So think of a firewall. Firewall has software to control it. So hackers find deficiencies or defects in this software. They create a hacking toolkit, and now all of a sudden they defeat your $1,000 firewall, and they're sitting on your server within 5 minutes. So vulnerability exploitation is a really, really big problem, and it continues to be. In fact, FBI, Homeland Security, everyone is really pushing this concept of identifying known exploitable vulnerabilities on your computers, on your firewall, um, typically within a day to a couple days, and then fixing them. So what we see is, most IT resources have no tools, have no visibility into these vulnerabilities. They just assume their configuration is fine and they've done it properly. So vulnerabilities would be the next on my list. Third parties, fourth party, fifth party, now with AI and data moving around so many systems, sure. Companies that are processing claims or storing your EMR, EHR data, imaging
Right.
systems, right? These are all at risk. I think one of the biggest misperceptions that are out there in the healthcare field is like, get this data off my server and put it in the cloud. So guess what? It's not my problem anymore. Yeah, it doesn't work that way, right? It's always going to be your problem based on how the laws are written. And just because
Right.
the data is in the cloud doesn't mean it's more secure. It might be, it depends on the
Yeah.
quality of the company you're dealing with. So I, I,
Yeah.
I would say those are the three biggest risks right now that I see in healthcare in that order.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. And people don't realize how companies like HR for Health, how seriously we take, security and data. And you're right, not every company does do that, and not every company really focuses on that. And people are too trusting in many ways. So you're exactly right. And obviously we're not going to call out anybody, but man, when we were looking for a payroll partner, Gary, when we were looking for a payroll partner, right? We looked at all these national companies that they shall go nameless. They kept failing our security tests. Like we would pressure test them because they wanted, single logons and various other things and access. And we would pressure test them and they kept failing, failing, failing. Like all these doors would be open where somebody could get in. And so we just kept saying no. And what's scary about that is that, these same payroll companies, right, the ones that we didn't select, work with some of the bigger banks, right? They work with some of these other large companies, and so people don't even realize that how easily their data can be accessed. So okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the consequences, okay, of this, because when and I'm one of these until you and I met and you taught me the right way of thinking about this. But when people hear data breach, they usually think like IT, okay, and or they might think legal. But I want to shift the gears a little bit because you and I talked about this briefly before. Why is this actually like an HR problem, right? Before we think about it from an IT or legal, but why is data breach really an HR problem to you?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of reasons around that. And I will say that in almost every ransomware event or cyber event we deal with, there is a significant HR component to it. So let's look at it from the most basic terms. Typically, regardless of the size of the practice, whether you're a mom and pop or a larger organization, you typically have HR related files on your network, right? It could be a spreadsheet of people, it could be tax forms, it could be documentation for employment purposes. And often, what the threat actors will do is they will run a script on the network looking for these types of documents because they know, well, if I get all of the employees and their HR, that's going to put that business in a slightly different situation, and it may force them to pay now because they don't want that data released. So there's that part of
Right.
it, right? The legal / the compliance part of HR, right? You can't compromise an employee's personally identifiable information. Then you have what I like to say is the human element of it. The amount of stress and frustration that these events cause everyone in a practice is something you almost can't comprehend unless you've gone through it firsthand or talked to a colleague, because it touches every single person's job. If you're an
Mm-hmm.
assistant, you can't pull up the patient's information. If you're the doctor, you can't run your practice. If you're in billing, you can't access anything. And then if you're front desk, you have all these patients that are calling and screaming at you because, you know, they can't get their data. You can't schedule them. They show up for their appointment and you don't even know who they are. You can't access their records. You're rescheduling them. And that's for small practices. And then think about larger organizations. It becomes a real problem. And then what also happens is, and I've seen this numerous times, you have employees, especially if we're on the ground with an event, employees will come up to us and be like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And I'm like, yeah, what's up? Well, 2 days ago, I got this weird email and I did click on it. Did I cause this whole event? Am I going to get fired? Is there a legal issue for me? And
Sure.
so, people start taking this, very personally and realize, hey, my job may be on the line. And then if you want to go to the extreme, we've had victims, I'll say small, medium-sized groups like that 5 to 15 location group that the damage was so significant to all of their locations, they couldn't make payroll. They maxed out their insurance policies. They couldn't pay bonuses over the holidays. They couldn't pay payroll for weeks. Some of it was due to they couldn't even access the systems. They didn't even know how long people worked. So yeah, look, I think, there's a technical element of these, and then there's the human element, and then you have the doctors. I tell every doctor that is a victim of this, I said, listen, you can't control anything that's happening from this point forward, right? You are at the mercy of a criminal that is going to dictate every single step of this. You have professionals that can guide you now, but understand they're criminals and they will do what they want to do. And doctors like, well, I'm still down. It's been a week. Like, yeah, but that's how the process works. You may be down, doctor, for another 2 weeks. Right, we're waiting for the threat actors to do what they promised to do. So the stress that these doctors go through is unbelievable, and it's really sad, right? The victimization of these types of events is really heartbreaking, and I think everyone just looks at this as a business thing. I'm telling you firsthand, it's never just a business thing. It's a personal thing, right? They're looking under the hood of everything and controlling your destiny and controlling your life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you hit on a really good point, which is the stress that lives with, and the accountability that always lands back on the employer, right? The doctor who owns the practice. And it is a heavy load because, you think about the patients, of course, but you think about the employees and all of their data and how that trust was now violated, to your point. And I think it's not just a morale thing, although that obviously gets impacted, but there's a retention issues there. It really is the start of sometimes not even a slow demise, but a very quick demise. And we've had a lot of clients who, after hearing you speak or after they hear topics like this, come to us and go, you know what, I want to take everything and put it on HR for help because I don't want to deal with things on my server. I don't want to deal with that. I'm trying to protect my employees because you never know, right? And sometimes the actors are foreign, like the ones that you're dealing with from a cybersecurity, and sometimes they're not. They're sometimes in office, right? And they can do these same things and steal these files. And so yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Now, as you kind of think about the documentation side of it, Gary, is there anything from like in terms of documentation that practices need where if they're doing some of the right things and then maybe they have some documentation, and I don't know what that would be, but if they have some documentation, then it might help them after an incident, dealing with the feds or the government?
Yeah, look, I think our worlds are identical. What was on paper, right, prior to the event, not what you put on paper after the event. So, if you look at HIPAA, right, I don't want to turn this into a HIPAA lecture because everyone will fall asleep. But, if you look at HIPAA, right, HIPAA basically outlines everything you need to do in the event you have an incident, right? From an incident response plan, and even going back prior to that, like, did you have a workstation use policy? One of the most simplistic things. Honestly, guys, go to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT write a workstation use policy, or talk to Ali's group if you guys do that. But let's take a scenario of an employee using a computer for personal reasons, and they download something that results in 10,000 patient records getting compromised. If that patient signed a document, or it was part of their HR manual saying you are not allowed to use any work computer for any personal reason, and they decide to not follow the policies and procedures, and there's an event, when the investigators come into your practice, because they will, right? It's required under federal law. They have to investigate every single type of data breach over 500 records. They will say, Dr. Mary, can you show us all the policies and procedures? Did your employee sign something about a workstation use policy? And Dr. Mary is like, well, absolutely. Here's the signed document from Stacy. You know, she's the one that downloaded. And the investigator's like, okay, that's going to change the direction of our investigation, because you did do the right thing. You know, your employee opted to do the wrong thing, but you had documentation in place. So I would say, just like HR, just like doctors writing medical notes, right? If it's not documented, it didn't happen. And that's the stance we take. But sure, there's tons of things that you can do proactively. You can have a security risk assessment. You can have technical assessments. You know, you can have all these policies and procedures in place that, God forbid you have an event, will position you way better with a state attorney general investigating you, or Office for Civil Rights investigating you. You know, the HIPAA enforcement branch, the enforcement branch of HIPAA, or Health and Human Services, really. So yes, for sure, I'm a huge proponent of that. It's, you know, it's not fun, it's not hard, but it's not easy, right? But every practice needs to, you know, think about having those things in place in the event that there's an issue. It's not always a cyber event. You brought it up. You have bad people sometimes in your practices, right?
Yeah.
You know, we had a client of ours who signed up for us, and one of their employees, like a year before, opened up a tattoo parlor, and the husband's like, hey, can you give me the list of all the patients from your practice so we can market to them? I mean, it turned out that someone connected the dots, and that practice faced, you know, a tremendous burden dealing with that. So,
oh my God, that's like that's like a vanilla issue, dude. I have had people, I've had doctors who had like employees' boyfriends like break into the office. They told them like the code, the security code, and then they came in and took charts off the walls. You know, and like and you know, like what is happening? You know, like what is happening? Now, they're not the smartest people. Like, you know, there are security cameras all around the building. They decided to drive, you know, the girlfriend's or you know, the employee's car there, even though she wasn't present. So it wasn't the smartest, you know, group. But I mean, we have seen some crazy things. We've seen some crazy things. There was even again, gosh, I should write a book of the things I cannot talk about, right? You know, that are like protected by attorney-client privilege, because there's like so much. But there is a company, right? There is a company, a marketing company in dental. Actually, they do optometry too, but regardless, that holds. I mean, I don't think they do it anymore. But when someone's trying to break their contract with them, I've had at least 4 situations where they've held the data of the practice, Gary, hostage.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Like they just completely shut the doctor out of the entire practice management software. And like, I mean, it was some crazy stuff, man, like some crazy stuff. So you know, the threat actors are coming from, like, really can come from all over the place.
I totally agree. Like, and you bring up a really good point. I always like to do pro tips, right? So I'll throw out a good pro tip right now. As the doctor, practice administrator, you know, we have some group practices here as an executive, you should have the usernames and passwords to the following things: your firewall, any cloud technology where there's backups, the administrative account to your server, right? And all of the usernames and passwords to your bank accounts. I've seen some practices where the doctor's like, I don't know my password to the backup, or I don't know the password to my bank account. My practice administrator does all of that. You have to have all of that information written down on a piece of paper, not saved on your computer or your network, right? Maybe keep it in a safe at your house or somewhere. So that way, if something bad happens, you can pull that fire alarm, right? Pull that piece of paper out and potentially help recover much more quickly than without that data. So you control your network, you own the network. If your IT resource, like, we're not giving that to you, whoa, you've got a major problem with that IT resource. Those aren't his computers. Those are your computers. That's your firewall. You have every single right under federal law to have full access to those devices. You cannot be locked out of those machines. You said it very well, Ali. You cannot be locked out of those machines for any reason. And we've seen the same thing. The practice gets in a fight with their IT guy and they don't pay a bill. The IT guy locks them out of the network. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
Federal problem. Like, you want to play the game, and you're not going to win that. You can't lock a healthcare provider out of their patient records.
Yeah,
So.
no, it's crazy. Yeah, no, it's crazy. And yeah, I mean, and although it's different data, but we've seen people do that with websites, like take people's websites down. And by the way, sometimes these vendors will say things, for everyone who's listening, I think it's really important to know this. Sometimes vendors will say things that are false. Shockingly, right? So they'll say something like, you're on a subscription plan, right? A monthly subscription plan. If you don't pay me, I can shut you out of your data or your website. Or that's not necessarily true, as Gary has said, and there's other protections in place. So just know that if you ever are in a position like that, just give the law firm a call. Don't call HR for help; they can't help you on this. But give the law firm a call, and we'll talk to you about it. Okay, I do want to stay on this vendor thing for a second, Gary. So, when a doctor is looking to bring on a vendor, okay, and let's say they don't have the reputational kind of history that, let's say, a company like HR for Health has, what are some important questions that practices should be asking their new vendors that they want to sign up with, as far as security and compliance and whatnot?
Yeah. So this all comes full circle again to HIPAA, right? So HIPAA says you're supposed to do a security risk assessment on any third-party entity that has access to your data, stores your data. So think of your IT company. They remote in, right? That technician sitting at the desk remotes in, and your practice management system's up on the screen. They have access to your patient data, right? Or you back up and they have access to literally 100% of your patient records. So a couple things that I would say are extremely valuable to ask. One is starting with the technical questions. And this is something that's pretty easy to do. You can ask them, is your security monitored by a third party? Right? Or are you monitoring that all in-house? So one of the things that the answer you probably should hear is, well, we have a third party monitoring our network for us. Or they may say, well, we conduct annual security assessments through cybersecurity firm ABC. And that firm comes in, and on a yearly basis, they do what's called a penetration test. They do a security assessment and risk analysis. They do vulnerability scanning, things like that. Because what I always say is you can't assess your own security, because what IT company is going to say to the practice, oh, yeah, we don't have good security at our business, right? So it doesn't make any sense. It's the fox guarding the hen house.
Right, of course. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I say, yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So the next question is, okay, I'm willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement with you. Can you send me a copy of the most recent report? And if they're like, nah, we're not going to do that, then you have two options. One, you walk away because obviously they have something to hide. Or B, you say, okay, if you're not willing to share the full report, can you get me an executive summary from the cyber company? And we do this all the time for clients, right? We have clients that, work for Fortune 100 companies, and the chief information security officers from those companies want to see some type of executive summary for security. If they're still not willing to provide that, 100% walk away, period. Don't even give it a second thought. I think that's so critical. And then look at the date of it. If it's not within the last 12 months, it's completely useless, right? Because as we said at the beginning of this discussion, this stuff's moving so quickly. There are threats today that didn't exist a year ago, or even really 6 months ago. So a security assessment is really important. Look, SOC, SOC 1, SOC 2, I think is really, really important. I'm going to say most IT companies in the dental space do not have that. But if you're working with, EMR, EHR, imaging systems, organizations that really store confidential information, you've got to ask that question. And what I've seen in the dental space and medical space too frequently is the practice like, well, my IT guy's backing everything up for me. I'm like, oh, that's great. Where's that data being stored? And then it's crickets. Like the doctors have no clue. I'm like, well, we need to talk to that IT person, right, or company, and understand what's going on. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard, oh, well, they have some servers in their cloud and they're backing all their data up to the cloud. I'm like, oh my God, like this is just a disaster waiting to happen here, or they have a server at their office and they're backing up all their clients there. So, that's a challenge. So I think it really comes down to asking some simplistic questions. And you know what? You can judge pretty quickly when an organization you're going to work with has the right answers, even if you're not technical. If there's a lot of hemming and hawing and they're like, well, I need to ask someone about that, or I don't think we have that, the risk is too big nowadays to be partnered with the wrong company.
It is. Yeah, no, I think that transparency makes a big difference, in addition to the technology itself. And you're right. I mean, SOC 2, for those of you listening, and it's, SOC and then 1 or 2, that is sort of the standard for a lot of companies. And you're right. We know, I mean, HR for Health is SOC 2 compliant, but there's a lot of companies that are not in the dental space, and you're exactly right. It is a concern. But I do want to ask you about this. We hear SOC 2 mentioned. You just brought it up too. But what is it actually? Like, what does it actually mean? Can you give me like a 30-second description of what it means for our audience?
Yeah, so SOC 2 is basically a standard that was put together by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, I believe. I'm usually good at acronyms. I think that's right. And really what it's designed to do is two things. So a regular SOC audit will be something like this. An auditor will open up a spreadsheet and they will say, okay, Ali, as the CEO of the organization, I'm going to ask you all these questions and you're going to tell me what your responses are. And then they're going to go into that spreadsheet, they're going to mark your responses down, and then they're going to give you a report, right? How well did you comply? What SOC 2 really does, which is kind of the next level up, it starts to really make sure that the things you're saying you're doing are actually being done, right? So if you say, for argument's sake, I'll give you an example. Hey, Ali, are you encrypting all the hard drives on your laptop so if someone steals it, they can't get the data from those laptops? Oh, yes. Okay, show me. Right. You'll prove to me as an auditor that you're actually doing that, and you're going to have to provide a screen capture. They may be sitting with you, right? You're going to have to show on their laptop conceptually, right? So things like that. So, and then there's SOC 2 type 1, SOC 2 type 2. I believe SOC 2 type 1 is a test for that period of time. So we had this done today. And then type 2, if I'm correct, occurs over like a 6 to 12 month period of time. So they're constantly evaluating this. So, from a SOC perspective, SOC 2 type 2 is really what you want to see. But look, I think you also have to weigh the risk. Like HR stuff for you, that's amazing that you guys got your SOC done. For an IT company, it may be overkill, and it's not cheap. Like I know you guys spent a lot of money on a SOC, right, because of the amount of work that's required. So I think that's really important. Yeah.
It is really important. I'm going to summarize, I think, for the audience, which is SOC 2, I think, the way I would think about it for everyone who's listening is that it should really be kind of the starting point, not necessarily the only stamp of approval, just based on what Gary said. It's a starting point of how a practice uses, the data. Like what are the documented controls around security and confidentiality or whatnot. What it doesn't tell you, though, right? What it doesn't tell you, and Gary, feel free to expand on this, is like how well those controls actually work in that environment, right? Like it doesn't do that. So part of that, right, are some of the things that I think Gary was talking about, and we're getting a little bit into the weeds. But the reason why we're talking about this for you is not for you to become cybersecurity experts. We know you're not going to do that. You're not going to be that. But it's so that when you are hearing these things, you're asking the questions, and the things that I would ask, and to summarize what Gary was saying is, who's got data ownership, portability, right? What are some breach notification timelines, if you will, right? Is the access sort of onshore or is it offshore, right? What happens, if there's outages to your data, right? Like we at HR for Health have like so many redundancies that if like even two of our locations goes down, the third can handle all the volume. Now it'll be super slow, but it can handle it, right? While the other two come back up. And like in our history, that's never happened, right? Where like two of three, or even really one of three, goes down for like a serious long period of time. But this is the kinds of things that I think people need to ask for. And I think for healthcare practices, having a business associate agreement is important, and then asking these just general questions is important, and seeing how people react and how they discuss it with you, I think is almost as important as their answers. And because Gary, you I'm sure I've seen it. I know I've seen it, where you start asking these questions and people get all defensive, and right immediately that this vendor is not ready.
Yeah. And you said the most compelling word, which is transparency, right? If you're operating in the healthcare space and you don't have these answers readily available, you probably shouldn't be operating in the healthcare space. That's the reality of it, right?
That's right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So, okay. So now we've talked about all of this. I think there's a lot of good information there for people to sort of chew on and think about. But let's talk about strategies now as next steps. Okay. So if I'm a practice and I want to get proactive, okay, about this, where's I know there's definitely a multi-layered cybersecurity approach to all of this, but where should they start?
Yeah. So I always say you need to approach this from two aspects, right? I think the easy lift is training, right? Going back to your initial question, where's my risk? Like, we don't need to address, the 1% risk. We need to address the 60, 70% risk right away. So under HIPAA, and some states are now requiring this as well for organizations that store personally identifiable information, and every state has a little bit different definition of this. You have to provide cybersecurity awareness training for all of your employees that access computers that contain any type of confidential information, such as patient records or even HR files, right? Mm-hmm. So leveraging platforms that are usually cloud-based that provide educational modules on how to detect phishing and spear phishing and text messaging scams and download scams, right? These are available. Typically cybersecurity companies have platforms that can do all this education, but just like everything we've been talking about, you have to document it, right? Hey, auditor, here's my documents on all my cybersecurity awareness training. Here's when the employees took it. Here's their score. Here's their renewal date. And here's what we trained on. very, very powerful, right? If you get audited and you hand an auditor that type of documentation, they're immediately going to be like, okay, it appears that this organization, as of right now, is taking this seriously. Versus the doctor saying, I'm sorry, Mrs. Auditor, I didn't know I had to do training. That's going to take you down a very, very different path from a legal perspective and a potential fine perspective, right? So I always say start with training. It must be ongoing. It can't be, well, I told all my staff not to click on things. I hear that from doctors all the time, all the time. They're like, oh no, I'm very, very on top of this. And I tell my staff not to click on things. I'm like, doctor, do you get x-rays from other doctors? Yes. Does your staff click on those x-rays? And then they realize like, all right, that thought process probably isn't valid. So start with training. The next thing is a vulnerability assessment, going back to risk number 2, right? Those improperly configured firewalls, those computers that have software on them that are vulnerable to a cyber event. I will tell you that, and I work with probably 150 different IT companies in the healthcare space. 95%, and that's a conservative number, have no visibility into their clients' vulnerabilities.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy because not almost every single ransomware attack has exploited some type of vulnerability, or in many cases, multiple vulnerabilities. And a lot of these attacks could be prevented if the practice had full visibility into their security risk. So running vulnerability scans, which is basically a piece of software that provides intelligence on which computers are vulnerable, which firewalls are vulnerable, and then acting on it is very, very important. In fact, almost on a daily basis, CISA, which is part of Homeland Security, and FBI push out the latest exploitable vulnerabilities that organizations have to track. So it's not only identifying the vulnerabilities, but now that they've been identified, how do you get rid of them? So I hear a lot of IT companies we just patch every week. I'm like, well, how do you know your patches worked? How do you know that, the patch from 5 days ago actually stuck? We've all installed software, we've all done things on computers and it just doesn't work. You got to do it again. So the assumption that it's there is a problem. So I think, vulnerability management is really, really critical. I would say the next big thing is AI-based antivirus software. And we talked a little bit about this when I was on stage with you at your summit, but the 2 key or dominant players in this world right now for antivirus are CrowdStrike and SentinelOne. These guys are doing an amazing job at detecting attacks on the network and shutting them down quickly. However, there's a couple caveats here. It is not an end all to be all, because when these tools are triggering, something bad has already happened. Someone's in your house, right? And the dog's coming after that person.
Right.
And that bad guy may throw the German Shepherd a hot dog and bypass your security, or the German Shepherd may grab them, right? Same thing with these antivirus applications, and hackers are smart and they have ways of evading stuff also. So understand that your primary mechanism is to prevent these intrusions through training and the vulnerability scanning, and then leveraging AI tools to detect the attack and shut it down and minimize it. But anyway, like that example I gave you of the invite for the holiday party, these tools didn't stop that, right? Because they're not designed to stop stuff like that. The next thing is email security. So one of the ways that we blocked this attack from thousands of dental inboxes, right? Email in Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 is we leverage AI-based email security tools that live in the Microsoft environment or the Google environment, and they read the emails, they become familiar with these types of attacks. We teach the AI proactively to look for these types of things, and it rips the email out of someone's inbox before Stacy at the front desk has the opportunity to click on that stuff. Right. So not 100%, but very, very close. So, I know you mentioned everyone wants kind of that multi-layer security, but that's how this works. There's no Swiss Army knife, that solves all problems. And I think one of the biggest problems, Ali, that I'm seeing in the IT space right now is sometimes really good tools are deployed improperly, managed improperly, and monitored improperly. So guess when most ransomware attacks occur? You think it's Wednesday at 1 o'clock, or is it Sunday at 2 a.m.? Well, they're going to attack on the weekends because they know the IT companies aren't responding, in the dental space,
Well,
and small medical.
Gary,
So
I want to build on that though for a second, because you never say this, but I want to bring this up for everyone, which is, one of the things you brought up that I think is super, super important is to do that assessment, right? That you just mentioned. And who does that assessment is really vital. And as my wife is a pediatric dentist, and I kind of tested this theory I have, that you kind of talked to me about before, which was I asked her to ask her IT, hey, like, how's our security? Like, how are things going? And the answer was, we're good. We're good.
yeah,
We're good.
a hope and a prayer.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what Gary's talking about, because you are not there. I've literally never heard you say this. You are not there to replace IT. You are not there to replace IT. You've always been very firm about that, and which I think is very important. But there needs to be someone in here looking at what the IT folks are doing, and putting another layer of protection between whatever it is they're doing and these folks that are trying to gain access to your data. And if you just take them at their word, you're really putting all your trust in just one person. And you said something that I want to make sure the audience really hears, because I think it's really important, which is that it's a multi-step process, right? It's like it's not just one thing, right? Like when you're driving the car, you got to wear your seatbelt, and then you got your airbags, right? You're not looking at your phone, right? You're paying attention. All of these things keep you safe on the road. And when you're on the road of cybersecurity, you need multiple layers. Together, these things seem to work really well. And so I don't know what if you want to build on that, but I think people sometimes are under the misunderstanding that they can rely on their IT to do some of these threat assessments that we're talking about, and I just think that's a mistake.
Yeah, look, I think the way to look at it is you need an advocate, right? You need someone that's going to come in, that's going to be truly impartial. The design of it, or the nature of it, is not to find fault, right? We're not coming in and be like, oh, these guys suck. I can't believe you're working with them. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's like, okay, here are the things that are working well. Here are the areas that you need improvement. And as the doctor, you need to be made aware of this, right? Because in the end, compliance is your issue, has nothing to do with the IT company, right? OCR is not investigating your IT company when you have a ransomware attack, right? They're going to wash their hands of that whole event. There's going to be something in the contract that says we're not responsible for any type of breach in your practice, right? And the doctor is going to own that responsibility. And that's the whole concept of what we're seeing in 2026, like executive ownership, right? Whether you consider yourself the CEO of your practice or the doctor, like you got to own this. But
you got to own it.
To your point, right? Security is becoming so complex that if you are missing any of these layers, there's potential for an issue. Like I've never heard like that car analogy before, but I'm thinking about that. I'm like, I'm stealing that, Ali. That's amazing, right? Because you could have airbags, you could have anti-lock brakes, right? You could have everything. You look down at your phone and the guy slams on his brakes in front of you, and your collision control triggers and slams on the brakes. You're like, oh my God, I almost just rear-ended this guy at 55 miles an hour. My car stopped itself.
Right.
And literally that's where we are right now with all of the methodologies and entry points into these environments. Like anyone that has just a firewall and antivirus, you will have a security incident. Period.
Yeah.
I will bet thousands of dollars on that, because I'm seeing it firsthand right now. It doesn't. Are they necessary? Sure. But those are your anti-lock brakes and your airbags. You're missing all of the other systems like Ali just
Totally.
mentioned. So great
You
analogy.
got to give me credit when you talk about that with that analogy in the future. You're like, Ali from HR for Health gave me this.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And everyone can kind of relate to it, right? I mean, that's
100%.
And to your point, you don't need to be technical, right? You just need to know, right, that a third party is coming in, assessing this, giving you the information as a business leader. And guess what? You can be like, you know what? I got insurance. I don't care about any of this. I'm not spending a penny. Or you could say, oh my God, I don't want to be a victim. What do I need to do to secure my practice and my patients?
Yeah. Well, it was actually somebody posted a question today asking, is there insurance that covers some of this? And I can answer there is, insurance that covers, cybersecurity attacks and whatnot. It really varies, from, $5,000-$10,000 to much bigger policies. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Gary?
Yeah. So if you go to renew your policy this year, I am willing to bet almost everything that I discussed from a security perspective is going to be a question on that application. Do you do vulnerability management? Do you do training? Do you do pen testing? Do you have someone watching your networks 24/7? Do you assess third parties? These are all questions they're asking because they know this is where the breaches are coming. I will tell you that most small practices, I am talking a single doctor in a single location, if they have a ransomware attack, you're looking at about $250,000 event minimum.
Right? Oh, wow. Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot bigger than I thought. Holy
Way
cow.
bigger, right? Because the ransom demand alone on a healthcare entity is usually very significant. It's rare that I see it less than 6 figures. If you're a multi-location, multi-doctor, especially specialists who have large patient databases and large imaging databases, the hackers will look at that and be like, whoa, look at the file size of this EMR system. Look at the file size of these x-rays. And they're going to be like, oh man, we're not asking $250,000. We want 7 figures for this one. We want $1 million, So if you talk to your agents, most of them will tell you, you should get a minimum of a $500,000 policy if you're a small practice. If you're larger, multi-million. That's just where we are right now. So the days of a $5,000 ransom are mostly
long gone.
Long gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's super important. I mean, it's important for everyone to hear this because again, we're not trying to be, we're not trying to scare you into it, but we're trying to have you really pay attention to it. And as we, in the last couple of minutes, what I would, I think, want everyone to know and where to land on this is that, cybersecurity compliance is not an IT problem. It's not an employee problem. It's not a, Russian problem. It's a leadership problem, right? And it's so hard. I mean, I get it. It is so hard to want to invest money and time and energy to get compliant with something that is so amorphous. But just like when we started HR for Health, 13 years ago now, and nobody talked about HR compliance. Like nobody talked to, like there were a couple of companies, Gary, that were doing employment manuals. They're still around. They're like the equivalent of like your IT, like they do like the basic stuff, but you don't know anything about them. Like they may be telling you the right thing. They may not be telling you the right thing. When we came in, we changed the entire conversation when it came to HR compliance, where people knew people that were getting sued. And it took time, though. It took time to educate and to teach and to say, look, HR compliance is important. This is why you need a software. And we've been able to kind of crack that and help people and protect them. I feel like that's where you are. Even though cybersecurity is not a new thing, just like HR and employees wasn't a new thing when we started, people are starting to get wiser and wiser about it because they're seeing their friends get attacked. They hear, companies getting attacked. I mean, for Pete's sake, I mean, Henry Schein, a Fortune 100 company, got hacked, right? Casinos are getting hacked. I mean, and so there's no reason why small practices can't get hacked too. So I would say, as we end today, is make sure you're looking internally. It's a leadership thing. It's a cultural thing. And as we end, Gary, can you tell everyone where to find you so that they can talk a little bit more with you about the next steps and how you might be able to help them? Obviously, once they contact you.
Yeah, for sure. I always say, hit me up on LinkedIn. I publish tons of great articles all around healthcare and cybersecurity. So if you want to read up on that, you can direct message me through LinkedIn, Gary at blacktalonsecurity.com. You can also call our 800 number and ask for me. And look at that, there's a QR code. Thank you, marketing department. So there's my QR code. Even better, there's probably a calendar link associated with that. So you can scan that. That'll book some time directly on my calendar, and then we can just have a candid conversation. Let's talk about your practice and what some of your concerns are, and how we can potentially help you out. I say this at every single lecture I do. I'm an open book. If you just need some advice, you're not quite sure, where to go, what to do, you're looking for the name of a good IT company to help you out, and as a starting point, hit us up, right? Happy to, kind of provide that guidance as well. In the end, we're all in the same industry. We all need to help one another, and that's really what this is about. Creating awareness, and what you do with that, that's, as a business leader, that's up to you. Same thing. I make decisions for our company, but I always like to have all the information I can. I don't pretend to know it all. So
yeah, we have a lot of happy clients that use Gary. Of course, they're not happy to necessarily have to have this conversation, but they know it's a necessity. And Gary and his team do a great job of doing this assessment and give you a plan. And of course, if you're listening today and you want to hear more about HR for Health and how to get compliant from that perspective, and to make sure that your HR documents are in a safe place, please scan this QR code or go to hrforhealth.com, and our team will take care of you. Gary, thanks again for being on today, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone. Awesome. Thank you.